Part 2. Many are called, but few are chosen. Chapter 36. This is how the BBC summed up the SAS in one of their broadcasts. The reputation of the SAS stretches worldwide. It has a reputation for ruthless efficiency and military professionalism. Other Special Forces units model themselves on the SAS, whose selection procedures are arduous and protracted. Around 9 in every 10 hopefuls fail. Like so many boys growing up, I'd always heard about the famed Special Air Service, or SAS, the shadowy figures that formed what is widely acknowledged as the toughest, most elite Special Forces fighting unit on Earth. In quiet moments, I'd always wondered what it would be like to try their selection course to join. Would I be one of those who had the right stuff, or more likely would I be among the majority who attempt it and fail? I wondered what it would really take to be one of those few that earn the right to wear the famous sand-coloured beret with its winged dagger. What toll would it exert to be part of this SF Special Forces unit, and would I have what it required to join the elite, the best? Aged barely 16, I had passed my potential officer's course to join the Royal Marine Commandos. As a young officer after school, I was all set to join up, just like Dad had done. But part of me wondered, should I not at least try selection for the SAS reserves before committing to the Marines, just to see? The rational answer that came back to me was that I should be honest with myself. I was fit and strong and determined, but I wasn't a totally natural athlete. I'd always had to work hard at it and hard. I had many friends who were naturally much stronger and fitter than me, and they didn't even have to train at all, and deep down that made me doubt myself. Yet, somehow, because I wasn't naturally gifted athletically, I had developed this ability to fight and to push myself hard physically and mentally. It was this fight and determination that would become the key ingredient to attempting selection, much more than any natural ability. If SAS selection does one thing, it ensures that everyone over the many months reaches that stage where they are physically dead on their feet, utterly spent, however fit you are. What the SAS is looking for is spirit and fight. Those soldiers who, when every bone in their body is screaming for rest, will dig deep and start moving again and again and again. That isn't natural fitness, it's heart. And it is this that selection demands of all that attempt it. At this stage, though, I maybe didn't have the confidence in myself to understand that we all have that spirit in us. I felt a little more comfortable with Marines. I'd experienced a small taste of what would be asked of me as a potential Royal Marine officer. I knew it would be tough, but I felt that I could do it. I was good at press-ups and pull-ups and yomping with a backpack, a staple of life in the Marines. Could I manage the ultra-long marches over the high mountains carrying seriously huge weights on your back, which is such a core part of the SAS selection? That somehow felt beyond what I believed I could do, and yet the voice still niggled. In the end, I concluded that nothing ventured, nothing gained, a vital ethos to follow if life is to have flavour, I've since learned. I knew that I should at least attempt selection. If I failed, well, at least I would fail whilst trying, face down in the dirt, knowing that I had given it my all. Oh, and what's more, I knew that the SAS requires secrecy from anyone attempting selection, which was perfect if I failed. I concluded at least no one would know. So that was the plan. But in truth, if I could have had any idea of the pain and battering that my body would go through on selection, I would have realised that it was insane to continue with this mad dream. But luckily, we never really know what the future holds. Normally, for a soldier to attempt SAS selection, it first requires several years of service in the regular army. But the SAS is comprised of 3 regiments, with 21 and 23 being reserve regiments to 22 SAS. Both 21 and 23 tend to be made up of former paratroopers or commandos who have left the regular army, but still want a challenge and an outlet for their hard-earned skills. The SAS then take these ex-soldiers, put them through a rigorous selection course designed to separate the best. They then take those few and train them up in the skills of a covert combat operative. But 21 and 23 SAS are also open to any civilians who can prove themselves capable of the exacting high standards demanded by the SAS. The route in is longer and more spread out, but it is a potential route in all the same. What I liked about the SAS Reserve was that it gave you a degree of flexibility in how you lived your life. You weren't a full-time soldier, yet many of the SAS Reserve soldiers did it as their main job. They could be deployed anywhere in the world at little notice, were highly trained and specialised, and yet they could pick and choose how much time they dedicated to the regiment. I loved the idea of that. Joining straight in from being a civilian meant a very steep learning curve, but if you were successful, you could join the SAS Reserve without all the tedious process of having to learn conventional boot cleaning soldiering first, and I never had any ambitions to be a conventional anything. Quite a few of my friends set out after school to join a regular tank or infantry regiment as officers. It would invariably involve a lot of ceremonial duties and high living in London, but despite the fun that would surely have, I found the thought of that lifestyle at barely 20 years old totally unappealing. I wanted adventure, and I was looking for the less trodden path. If I was to join 21 SAS, I could only do it as a trooper, in other words, at the lowest military rank available. I wouldn't be an officer like my public school friends, but I would be joining at the very bottom of the pile as a grunt, as troopers or private soldiers were often derogatively called. But grunt to me sounded much more challenging and much more fun. What's more, amongst SAS troopers, old Etonians were very thin on the ground. In the Brunel Hotel, Trucker and I had often discussed the SAS selection process, long into the night. To go through it was a decision we very much took together. It proved one of the best decisions we ever made, and it forged in us a friendship formed through a shared hardship that I could never have anticipated. For the rest of our days, we would be the best of friends because of what we went through together on SAS selection over the next year and beyond. We did, though, recognise that if only a very small number of those who applied eventually went on to pass the 21 SAS selection, then the likelihood of us both passing together was very small. It was an unspoken subject. Also, deep down, I did worry as Trucker was so much stronger than me. In fact, he was the most naturally fit man I'd ever met, and I so envied this. He was so effortlessly strong. When we ran and trained together, so different from me. And this just fueled my fear that he would pass selection and I would, in reality, never make it. On the 23rd of March 1994, we both arrived at the barrack gates, call-up papers in hand, tense and very nervous. We were beginning a journey that would effectively take us from enthusiastic civilians to highly trained Special Forces operatives in just under 12 long months. It was a daunting prospect. To be transformed from a total amateur to a total pro, skilled in everything from demolitions to covert maritime and airborne insertions, would be a journey that would stretch us to our limits. But before we could get anywhere near anything exciting, we would have to prove ourselves fit and determined, way beyond the normal. The only way to do that was through graft, sweat and bloody hard work. We had both been assigned to what I believe was one of the best squadrons in 21 SAS. It had a strong reputation within the SAS family as being made up of tough, no-nonsense, down-to-earth soldiers. They were mainly Welsh, fiercely protective of their own and utterly professional. But their reputation was hard-earned and well-guarded. We would have to work twice as hard to earn a place there. The first evening, along with an eclectic mix of other hopefuls, we were issued with kit, taken on a steady run up and down the nearby hills, interviewed on what our motivations were, and then briefed on what to expect. Commitment seemed to be the watchword. I went home relieved just to have started this damn thing. That is often the hard bit of any long, daunting journey. Trucker and I then returned for one evening every week, for what was called drill night. These evenings were designed to familiarise us with what we could expect over the year ahead. Selection itself would take place over many weekends, over many, many months, but these 2-day training tests and exercises were not to start for another few weeks. First, they wanted to sieve out those that wouldn't stand a chance. The weekly drill nights were spent being put through progressively harder and harder physical training. Often these consisted of very fast, lung-bursting runs, followed by hill sprints and fireman carries up and down, until every recruit was on his knees, often covered in vomit. One particularly nasty trick they played was to line us all up at the top of this steep 200-foot hill. They would then send us to the bottom, tell us to lift up our partner on our backs, and then announce that the last two to the top would be RTU'd, or return to unit, failed. We would all stagger to the top, fighting, not to be last, only then to be sent back down minus the last two to repeat it again and then again. Eventually only a few of us would remain, all reduced to crawling wrecks. Sometimes they carried out their threat and the weakest would be RTU'd. Sometimes they then just ran us all back to camp and no further action was taken, but you never knew. That was how they played it. You were only ever safe if you gave 150%, stayed near the front and never gave up. It was becoming apparent that this was the hallmark needed to be there, still be there the next week. Or they might get us to do some milling, 2-minute bouts in full gloves, where the aim was to punch your opponent with everything you could throw at him. No technique, just blood and guts. I always got paired with the 6'4" bruiser and came off worse. And then press-ups and lifts until we could no longer stand. At this stage, it wasn't even about passing selection. It was just about not getting thrown off the course today. Yet after each beasting session, the exhilaration always surpassed the doubt, and I was slowly learning to get used to the pain. That seemed to be key to survival here. Finally, our first pre-selection weekend was approaching. I arrived at the barracks at around 5:30 p.m, Friday night. We were to be driven to the SAS HQ for what they called pre-selection tests. These were simply intended to ensure that we were serious about doing this course and aware of what would be required. This is what the SAS officer told us as we sat huddled on the cold concrete floor of a semi-submerged hangar that first night. He added, "I hope that you will all pass. Trust me, the regiment always needs more numbers, but it won't happen just like that. I can guarantee that out of all of you here, I will be able to count on just 2 hands the number who will eventually join." I hardly slept at all that night. Instead, I lay awake waiting for 5:30 a.m. on the hard concrete floor in that dark, dank hangar that I was to get to know so well in the month ahead. At 6, we set off running as a large squad. All of the 21 SAS squadrons had come together for this pre-selection weekend. This was a first simple test, an 8-mile hill run in under an hour. I dug deep as the forest track wound up the hill, and we all went out for the 4th time. The rest of the morning was spent on basic skills lessons from directing staff, DS, and a briefing about the afternoon's activities ahead. We then got down to the assault course. I'd done a few tough assault courses before with the Royal Marines, but this somehow felt different. Before, the assault courses had been fun. This one had a sense of impending pain. What the DS wanted to see was total commitment and real effort, and there was always an officer or DS watching your every lurch and move. Occasionally they would swiftly step in and drag some poor person off and quickly tell them to start all over again, saying, "Do it properly," and with 3 times the speed and effort. After 2 hours of non-stop rolling, crawling, climbing, diving, I was dead on my feet, we all were. Legs and arms were screaming for rest. Before we had a second to recover, we were run through the woods fast to a small clearing. Manhole covers peppered the whole area. They were hidden entrances to a covered network of underground tunnels. If you hated confined spaces, this was going to be a bad place to find out. But we weren't given a chance to think about it. We were just each pushed individually down into those individual manholes, and then the covers were locked above us. On our own, we each negotiated our way around this dark underground and cramped maze of narrow passages only 3 feet high. Each was semi-submerged in 6 inches of water and mud. I crawled and crawled, feeling with my hands stretched out in front of me to probe the way ahead. Whenever I reached another manhole cover and some light seeping through the cracks, I would hear heavy army boots stamping on the metal grate above me. "Keep moving!" one of the DS would shout. "Faster!" Claustrophobia was a big no-no in the regiment. You needed to be able to work in close, confined conditions, and you needed to be able to control your emotions and feelings and learn to channel them. If you couldn't do that, then it was best that the regiment found out now before you started selection itself. Eventually we were released from our rat holes, tired, cramped and exhausted. We would then run around the assault course again, just for good measure. This was all about the DS having a chance to see all of our default characters. Was I a sticker, a grafter? Was I calm under pressure? Could I maintain my control in a crisis? Still, there was no rest. We were then escorted off to a large, heavy steel artillery cannon that sat sunk in the mud in the middle of a field. Well, get pulling, lads, and fast. We heaved at the tow lines and strained to move it, and slowly the wheel started to turn. We will tell you when to stop, and if you stop before, then you will be off the course. The DS rarely shouted, but tended to quietly just to watch. They were looking for self-discipline. This was their mantra throughout. You push yourself, lads. If you're too slow, then you failed yourself. Is that clear? It was clear, and it was hard, but I liked it. Such self-reliance was strangely empowering. A lot of the other soldiers who I encountered on selection found such an attitude difficult. Many recruits were used to being shouted at, endlessly driven on by colour sergeants. But the SAS way was different, and those who needed shouted at in order to perform would soon fall by the wayside. You had to be able to push yourself and be able to do it alone. And as I learned in the case of the SAS, it was always a little further. Eventually, as dusk fell, utterly exhausted, we were stood down. It had been a long, hard day, and I collapsed into my sleeping bag on the hangar's concrete floor. It was still dark when I could hear the corporals hovering outside the hangar like quiet, prowling lions. I fumbled to get ready. At 5:50, I left my heavy backpack on and shuffled out into the pre-dawn light. It felt even colder outside than it had been in the damp, open hangar. I was stood on parade 5 minutes early, ready. We had been told very clearly that if we were to be on parade at 6 a.m, then that really meant 5:55 a.m. A minute late and you were warned. Late again and you were off the course. We weighed in our packs on the makeshift scales, 35 pounds minimum, plus webbing, weapon, water and food. It felt heavy. Little did I know what I was in store for over the next year and the sorts of weights I'd finally be carrying. We set off as a squad at a fast walk that quickly became a forced stride and then a jog as we followed the same track around the hills all over again. The same 8 miles over 4 laps of the wooded hills, but this time in full kit. Come on, 1 lap done, 3 more to go. Halfway through the second, we lost several more recruits who slipped behind the group, unable to maintain the pace. If the speed was too fast and the weight too great now, then it was best they were taken off the course at this early stage for their own sake. By the 3rd lap, I was really struggling, gasping for more oxygen, snot smeared down my face, any humour or romance firmly gone, replaced by burning leg muscles and burning lungs. Just fight, Bear. Come on, 1 more lap. Don't waste all that hard work now. At last, the finish point, and I turned around to see a diminished group and a load of stragglers behind. The stragglers were taken aside. I never heard what was sent to them, but they looked utterly dejected and spent. They were sent off to pack their bags. Another 8 had been failed, but the real fear in me was whether I could keep pushing that hard. I mean, this was still only pre-selection, and it was tough. What on earth would SAS selection itself be like?